yes, audience, the floor is open for the questions. As always, you can post your questions on the chat box, and of course, there's an activities button specifically designed for this. You can find it right next to the chat option on your Google screen. Meanwhile, ma'am, we have a lot of interaction and engagement, which has, obviously resonated very well with what you have been presenting throughout. Like I said, but probably the aspect that you have provided very well-defined foundations or theory and, structures to whatever we are trying to discuss over here has definitely helped a lot of us, including me, definitely me, to grasp what you were actually, the vision that you were building. Because I think to a certain extent, theory plays a very, very important role into empowering or emboldening any idea or any thought process. If it's grounded very well, then I think the rest of the journey becomes a lot easier for us. So thank you for that. We'll be expecting questions anytime soon. So as they post, I'll present them to you, and then I hope we can discuss it ahead. So we have Lakshmi Prakash, who is asking, are the teachers trained to develop intrinsic motivation among students?
Are the teachers trained to develop extrinsic motivation among the students?
Intrinsic motivation.
Oh, intrinsic motivation. So are you saying in self-directed education, are the teachers trained to do this?
Yes.
So the emphasis in self-directed education would be very, very different, because of course self-directed education began before there was an insight into motivating factors, and everything I've been presenting now is really what has been discovered after the fact, looking at why does self-directed education actually work, because for anybody who's in conventional education, like most of us, I went to an ordinary school. I was very astonished when I first heard about self-directed education. It seems to be counterintuitive that you can do so little to motivate students, and yet they end up with very, very good motivation. So they are not trained to try and develop intrinsic motivation, because intrinsic motivation is born into us, which is where we see babies learning to speak, toddlers learning to walk. They don't do this because parents are training them to do this. They do this because parents are caring and loving and interacting with them very, very naturally. The parents are not trying, well, in some cases they are, but it doesn't matter whether the parent is trying to teach the child to speak. What matters is that the parent is interacting with the child and speaking with the child. And through that natural relationship, it builds that sense of relatedness, that the child has an intrinsic motivation to want to communicate in order to connect. And so that motivation arises very, very naturally. It's not something that the adult has to try to inspire in the child. And I think that this is the enormous shift in thinking that is very difficult to make. I think we assume so much that it is our job to get the child to learn, and it's actually impossible to get somebody else to learn. All we can do is try to meet their core needs. It's very much like, it's like growing a flower. You know, they say it doesn't help to tug at the plant to try to get it to go taller, or you'll just loosen the roots. But what you need to do is you need to provide enough sunlight, enough water, enough drainage, good soil. And this is where we say that meeting those core needs of autonomy and competence and relatedness is like providing the nourishing conditions that will allow intrinsic motivation to emerge. So when the self-directed education facilitators, and I offer training for self-directed education facilitators now, and we don't focus on how do you get them to have intrinsic motivation. We look at how do you stop yourself from denting their intrinsic motivation? How do you prevent yourself from undermining their motivation? So for example, we practice being careful of the feedback we give, that we don't start unwittingly rewarding or punishing or giving adult approval or disapproval, that we rather give feedback that is informative and that everything is consent-based. So yes, there's training, but not quite in the way that there would be in the regular coercive system. I don't know if that answers you.
Yes, there's a follow-up question for that what role does the parent play in this process?
So the parent, of course, is the first place of relationship and relatedness. So it's hugely important, the role that the parent plays. Every young person will start getting a sense of self from their relationship with the parent. Are they important? Do they matter? How much relationship is there? Does the parent treat them as if they are competent, or does the parent treat them as if they have to be sort of followed around every second? So, for example, we find that in cultures where little children are encouraged to assist, little children love to sweep the floor and help mommy cook. And where that is encouraged, you actually find children naturally growing into participating in this kind of interaction in a way that is competent. Whereas in places where you find, oh no, the child is going to be a nuisance, they're going to make a mess, they're going to slow down my work, and I actually undermine their sense of competence, and I undermine their sense of relatedness doing it with me, then you find that children are not actually able to be so helpful in the family environment by the age of 10. So I think it's very important for the parent to be aware of meeting these three core needs. Very often you'll find that the parent who's going to very tightly control what the child does and not let them make their own decisions, the child often starts to develop a learned helplessness where they feel like they have to get permission, they have to wait for an authority to tell them what to do. Whereas when the parent encourages them to say, what do you think about this? Do you have a better suggestion? Then you're actually going to help to actually create an empowered thinker who is able to take initiative. So I think it's a very important relationship.
Absolutely agreed, ma'am. We have more questions coming in. So Dr. Rajesh Sharma has asked, what happens to the national board's recognition of free schools?
So this is where we're at a very interesting place in history right now, because of course, especially with colonialism, the coercive system of education was extremely useful for colonial purposes, because it could be used to actually create a kind of enculturation all around the world that would align with what the colonial occupiers wanted to see. And it was very, very successful, and it has taken over the whole of the world, and it is now our normal. So most governments at this point simply have the bureaucracy to support a very, very standardized system of education, which has to be coercive, because you cannot standardize something if there isn't a way to standardize something if it's going to be very, very individual. And the moment that you take away coercion, then that's how you allow the individuality to emerge. So we're at a point where governments are slowly starting, some of them, to realize that the future of their population actually looks better if they have young people coming up through an education system that leaves them empowered and leaves them creative and leaves them able to have critical thinking and initiative and find ways to self-employ themselves rather than just waiting to be spoon-fed. But it's taking a while to get everyone's heads around the fact that we can do things differently. So each country has got a different relationship with self-directed education facilities in their countries. Some of them are actually encouraging them, and in very few instances even subsidizing them. Others are trying to shut them down. Others are simply ignoring them as a niche thing that is happening on the side. But we're going to see some interesting shifts in the next 5 years because the theory is so strong now, the research is so strong now that it's getting harder and harder to ignore. And more people are trying to bring self-directed elements in. For example, now there's a conference on the 20th to the 22nd of November, which is looking at how do we tackle the new normal that we want to see now as we all emerge after Corona. What new normal do we want in terms of having child-friendly communities and child-friendly education? And I think we're going to see a lot of shifts in the next 5 years. It's going to be very interesting.
Hopefully, fingers crossed for that, definitely. Ms. Gaini has asked, can you please mention a few practical methods of establishing discipline without disturbing the student's psychological state of mind?
To establish discipline, sorry, could you finish the sentence again?
Yes. A few practical methods to establish discipline without disturbing the student's psychological well-being.
Right, okay, right. So methods of discipline that actually support and meet those three core needs. So the one is absolutely to involve them in terms of their sense of autonomy and competence and relatedness by inviting them to participate in the setting of rules. It is much easier for me to follow a rule that I voted for, that I agree with, and that I see the reason for. So the simplest level, of course, is simply to explain your reasoning. Very often adults will say, because I say so. Now, because I say so is 100% imposing. There's no autonomy, no competence, and no relatedness in it. So it's very, very difficult to get somebody to follow a rule on that basis. Basically, I'm going to do it while you're watching me and while I can get caught. And the moment that I can't get caught, I'm going to do the opposite thing because I'm looking to meet my need for autonomy. So this is also where we see people saying that teenagers are very rebellious and things like this, and they go behind their parents' backs because their need for autonomy is so strong that if you don't give them a positive way to express their autonomy, they are going to find a negative way to express their autonomy. This is also where we see so many teenagers smoking, taking drugs, doing risky behaviors, irresponsible things, getting pregnant, because they're searching for a positive way to fulfill their autonomy, but they can't find one because they're so over-controlled that they can only find negative ways to express their autonomy. So the more that we give them an opportunity to be empowered, respected, have a choice, have a say, have a voice. So for example, now in India, you might be very interested in the work that's being done by Joseph Ratnam with the neighborocracies. You might want to look at that. He will support your school in setting up a children's parliament where the children can actually take responsibility for different things in their community, for uplifting the community, improving the way that things are done in education as well as just in the local environment and the neighborhood, but even just inside your classroom. If you're having difficulty, for example, keeping the class quiet, you can try Derry Hannum's trick. You know, you can say, you know what, I don't know if I'm the expert on how to achieve this. I'm wondering if any of you have some ideas. Maybe we could pull our chairs into a circle for half an hour and discuss what do we actually need in order for this classroom to function well for all of us, to feel like it's a good place to be. What changes do we need to make? What ideas do you have? Then you're encouraging that contribution, that autonomy, that sense of competence, and you're building a relationship, which can be very, very powerful. Likewise in the home. If I start by empathizing with my young person, it seems that you really, you really wish that you could do this, or you wish it could be that way because, so firstly, they feel heard, they feel related to. And then, do you have any ideas on how we could do this in a way that meets both our needs, that also meets the needs of the family, but where you will be happier? And then be genuinely open to listening and hearing and trust their wisdom because they are amazingly wise. And see if you can come up with a solution that everyone agrees on. Because as I say, then it's much easier for us to keep those agreements when we've actually participated in them, rather than feeling we have to just obey something that was imposed from the top.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We have another question coming in, which asks that what do you think about goal-oriented tasks for students, and if there could be some examples that you could share for self-motivated tasks.
Goal-oriented tasks for students.
Yes.
That's definitely a step that is halfway in between coercive and self-directed education, because you're giving them the goal, but you're not giving them the way to get there. So you're allowing for a certain amount of autonomy in terms of their choice of how to get there. You're also expressing support for their competence in that you trust that they will find a way to get there. And it's probably a lot more fun, which will help your relationship. So, this is a useful thing to do. What we find in self-directed education is that ultimately when we don't set goals for them, they often set far more exciting and challenging goals for themselves. But it's a process to get there.
I see. And you had mentioned a seminar, a conference that is coming up, right?
Yes.
So it has definitely piqued a lot of interest. Is it possible for you to just repeat and share the details of the same again?
Yeah, I don't have the details with me right now. Would I be able to send you a link and you can distribute it? It is a free
Yes, we can
event.
do that.
It's a free event and it's a participatory event. So the idea of it is for people all around the world to join it and then come up with ideas for how we can improve the new normal as it settles in, but also to network within countries and communities to have some very practical implementations where you are. If you can get other people from your own district or area to join it, then you'll have more of a group to get working with. So it's really an opportunity to gather together. As I say, it is free, it is online, it is international. And I will absolutely send the details to future school leaders to distribute to everybody.
Definitely, and the team of future school leaders will definitely convey it to all our participants. So I think that is all with the questions as of now. If we have any, we can wait around for a minute more and see if there's anybody else who would like to present a question. So, meanwhile, Yana ma'am, what has been the most rewarding part of your journey so far? If you could point out that one single thing, what keeps you going?
I think watching what happens with the young people and being able to actually see what they manage to achieve. I think if I look, for example, at the young people at Riverstone Village who have been self-directing themselves in their education all of the way, compared to those who have come to us from school, compared to those who are still in school, I find it very encouraging. I think the thing I love most is actually the relationships that I see happening between the young people. You know, when you put people under pressure, as they say, hurting people hurt people. And young people under pressure who are not having their core needs met can become very unpleasant sometimes. And this is also where people say, oh, you're going to give these people freedom. It's going to be chaos. They're just going to bully each other. There's going to be fights. There's going to be destruction. Not realizing that this is because these people are actually stressed when they're under a lot of pressure and coercion. Whereas it gives me a lot of faith in human nature when I look at young people whose core needs are met, because they are generally very much less pressured, very much less suffering, a lot more intrinsic motivation. So they tend to have very positive, supportive relationships. For example, teenagers supporting the younger kids rather than dominating them. Boys and girls actually getting on very well rather than stereotyping each other and being maybe disrespectful to each other. It really makes quite a difference to the way that they are as human beings, which I think is the most exciting thing for me, quite apart from the educational gains and the development of individual talent that I see, which is also very exciting.
That's great. And now we have the last question for you of the evening. It goes like, how can we prevent the students from being negatively influenced by the society?
So unfortunately, you can't. They are going to be influenced by society. And I think a lot of the influence that society has at this point is negative, because I think that we're at a point in history where there are a lot of people whose motivation is really their own profit and not really the good of the whole or the good of the young person. So we have a lot of influences coming in that are not ideal. And when we try to prevent our young people from being influenced by this, again, this can backfire quite easily if we're not careful. Because if the young person realizes that we are protecting them and blocking them from having these influences, we are then undermining their sense of autonomy. and we're undermining their sense of competence. You don't have the opportunity to decide for yourself about this. I'm going to protect you, and I don't trust you to make good choices and good decisions in the face of this influence. So I'm undermining your sense of competence, and I'm undermining our relationship because you're experiencing me as a controller. So the tragedy is, the more I try to protect my young person from these influences, the more likely I am for them to stop taking my advice, just the way that they stop taking their medicine when the doctor undermines these core needs. And ironically, the more that I am able to say to my young person, let's talk about this because there's a world out there, and this is what I think about this, this is what I think about that. What do you think about it? How do you experience it? What do you think are the pros and cons of this or that? What will your choice be if you are confronted with this situation? The more that we engage in that way and we build the relationship and we genuinely communicate a sense of curiosity and respect, and I'm interested in your point of view, and I'm interested in what choices you'll make, and they will be your choices, and I'm here to support you. Then instead of shielding them from those influences, we give them the opportunity to learn, to engage with thinking critically about what they're being exposed to. And we're also offering them that support of somebody who's lived a little longer, learned a little more, that they can ask us advice on things, and then they're more likely to take that advice. So this is again where there's an irony here, in that the more we try to control and protect, the more likely we are to create a backfire where we get the opposite result. Whereas the less that we're doing that, and the more that we're trying to connect and respect and support on their terms with consent, the more likely we are to be able to have a positive influence. So I really value that. For example, my eldest is now 15, and quite apart from not being the classic rebellious teenager getting into trouble, he comes to us first, to myself and my husband. We're the first people he comes to when he has a question about something that is disturbing or potentially problematic out there. He actively seeks our opinions and our input. We don't have to go chasing around after him to try and tell him. And that's really, for me, the proof of the method. And that's what we want to be cultivating, because that's really what will keep them safe.
Absolutely. So one last quick query, if I could put it like that. Definitely a lot of us have resonated with what you presented, and from a personal experience as well. So Selva Salvage is asking if you could just talk a little bit more about the Riverstone Village.
Righto. So Riverstone Village was originally intended to be a village, and I hope it will be again someday, in that we would like it to be a place where families can live and children can free range. But at this point, it's a bit like a school, in that it's a place where the young people can come during the day, during the week, to pursue their learning. Simply because the residential community ended up to just be too slow to organize, and my children were growing, and the other founding group families' children were growing, and we were like, okay, no, we just got to get started now. But we are modeled on the Sudbury Valley School that I mentioned earlier, with a few adaptations. So we don't have any curriculum. We don't have any classes unless they are organized by the young people, and they do sometimes organize classes, although often they prefer to learn more individually and more informally. And yeah, they are age mixed, so there's no separation of the different ages. Our youngest is 4, our oldest is 19, and they can mix very, very naturally, and during activities, it's very normal to see mixed age groups. And I don't know, what else would you like to know about it? It's a lovely, lovely place to be. I love going there, and I love being there, and it's hard for people to leave once they arrive. The children can't go away the holidays, and the staff and parents have to insist.
I mean, I think the way you just spoke about the Riverstone project, it much, has painted a very beautiful picture, if I could put it like that. And I'm sure that once the situations allows, I hope that we can visit it, learn from it, and replicate it to a certain extent. I think if we can do that, then a lot of things could be, moving towards a better future, if I could put it like that. So thank you, ma'am, for sharing your insights with us, with so much of factual as well as experiential learning that we have had today. I think that is something that all of us will hold on to quite a long time.